Good evening, New York and Jets fans across the United States and Newfoundland. I am John B. And along with SmackDad and SportsFan86. SmackDad is the only one you will see pictured tonight. SportsFan and I are going to be off camera.
Well,
It
I
is
may go back on later. I haven't decided yet.
anyway. We decided to do something special for you tonight. Tonight is traditionally the night where we have the most people visiting our site all year. That's because people are interested in the second night of the draft. In addition, we have some residual people coming over to check out our analysis of who the Jets picked in the first round. So we wanted to get on the air and give you some thoughts on what happened. I think it is fair to say that shortly before 9 p.m. this evening, for many Jets fans, the honeymoon with Mike Maccagnan, which had lasted a little over a year, ended as the Jets selected Christian Hackenberg in the second round. Hackenberg is out of Penn State. For the last couple of years, he was a highly touted quarterback. This year, his stock fell. He still came out, and the Jets decided to take him in the second round. There was a lot of buzz around it. And I think it's fair to say that this was a pretty unpopular selection. So I guess we'll start with SmackDad. What did you think of this pick?
Of the Hackenberg selection? I didn't think much of it. But look, you got to give the guy a chance in a pro camp, see what he does. But no, my preliminary assessment is that this was a proud representative of the Jets' second pick tradition over the years.
Is that failure? You're saying a failure of a pick?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Don't you understand the Jets' second round tradition?
It's a good one.
Ranks right up there with them.
Ah, man. You're obviously the pessimist, and JB is also, because after the pick, I got a one-word text that started with F and ended in CK, and it wasn't, anything good. I'll be that guy. I mean, look, to me, Hackenberg has the tools. He's inaccurate, but, I mean, other than the first two, I see a lot of inaccuracy issues with all the quarterbacks. I mean, there is a chance that he has everything go right and ends up being a star QB. It wasn't too long ago he was a star. So, maybe, but, I mean, to take a guy in the second round with that kind of an issue, I think that's the bigger issue people have with this pick. Maybe JB could say something that, backs me up or just completes me, it just eviscerates me.
I think Nick and I, you and I were on last night, and I spoke at one point. I spoke to people who were disappointed with the Jets' first-round selection, and what I told them was, we all get things wrong from time to time. None of us is perfect. Even the people who do this professionally sometimes mess up. So, you can hate a pick as much as you want. I see these comments. He's a bust. They're declaring him a failure before he sets foot on an NFL field. That's wrong. Sometimes a player develops better than you think he will. With that said, I don't want my logic to be. I don't want the best thing I could say about a pick to be, who knows? Maybe it'll work out. Maybe I'm wrong. There's just a lot I don't like about him. I think to succeed in the pros, you have to be able to navigate your way in the pocket. You have to be able to handle pressure. I know people talk about, his offensive line was bad. Well, I'm not sure that's really such an excuse because he handled it poorly. And beyond that, I always think, I think about David Carr when he was drafted by the Texans. The Texans had a terrible offensive line. They drafted Tony Baselli in the expansion draft. I don't believe he ever played a game for the Texans due to injury. And Carr just got drilled early in his career. And one of the things that really concerns me about Hackenberg is, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, his offensive line was the real culprit and he's totally blameless. How much damage has that done to his development? I remember going to see a preseason game. It must have been 4 years ago. I went to the Jets-Giants preseason game, and Carr was the Giants' backup quarterback. He was backing up Eli Manning. And I saw him, and when I saw him in person, I couldn't get over the fact that, at the snap, the first thing he did was he dropped his eyes to look at his line because he didn't trust his protection. And you get the impression that was something that just got drilled into him by how bad his offensive line was early in his career. So that's something that concerns me with Hackenberg. And the other thing is, I mean, we've heard. I feel like Hackenberg is the college version of all the excuses that we heard for Mark Sanchez and Geno Smith. You hear a lot about his coaching wasn't any good. You hear a lot about how he didn't have any playmakers. You hear a lot about his offensive line. I mean, at least Sanchez and Geno had some degree of success in college. I know you can blame his surroundings, and I know Penn State had some roster issues. They were still on probation for for some of his early years. But at the same time, if you're a big-time quarterback prospect, shouldn't you be able to complete more than 53% of your passes? Right here I have in front of me the Football Outsiders article. They're talking about quarterbacks, and they list the previous top 100 picks with completion rates of under 55% in their last college season. All right, so get ready for this list. You got Brock Heward,
Okay.
the immortal Dave Ragone,
Who?
Josh McCown,
Okay.
Kyle Buller, and then a couple former Jets, Marcus Tuiasosopo and Quincy Carter. So I think these are things that trouble me. And look, I'm rooting for the kid. I hope he proves me wrong. And look, just because I say a guy isn't, just because I say I hate a pick, and just because I say I don't think he's going to be any good, that doesn't necessarily mean he's. I mean, heck, that might be a positive. I think me praising the first round pick last night, that might prove to be the kiss of death for that guy. But I look at this and I just don't see it in the second round. I mean, I don't know that I see it in the third round. I don't even know if I see it in the fourth round.
I mean, go ahead, Smack That. Go ahead.
Okay, I just think John raised an interesting point on the fact that he didn't have success in college. I'm not sure I can think of any quarterback ever to come out with this level of success in college and then go on to be a real, star quarterback or even pretty good quarterback in the NFL. I could be wrong. I don't have a textbook memory on everything, but I'm not sure there's ever been somebody with this kind of record in college that came out and became a really good quarterback. Has there?
I can't think of any, and I think part of the reason for that is, we talk about the quarterback position. The quarterback is the guy that elevates everybody else. So a good quarterback is, going to make his own breaks. And it's like I said. I mean, I know Hackenberg wasn't in very good surroundings, but at the same time, I don't think you could handle it worse than he did. And I watch a lot of Penn State. I wanted to see it when I watched him. I heard everybody bashing him, and I thought, well, it can't be. There's got to be some redeeming qualities to him. I went in wanting to be impressed, wanting to kind of be the contrarian, but I don't know. I just haven't seen it.
Man, I know I get everything you guys are saying. I look at it this way. I mean, look at the way that he played the first year with the guy that was a good quarterbacks coach. Bill O'Brien, and then he went to a different scheme and it didn't work out. You guys can say, well, you elevate it, but you can't elevate a certain level. I played on teams that are bad, and not that I was good, but I've seen good players just get wasted because they didn't have anybody. Now, you could argue that Hackenberg could have done better. He could have handled it better. Honestly, I'm at the point where I'm like, let's see what the kid's got. Obviously, he's a project, but why are you taking a project when you need a quarterback now? It's not like you're rolling into the season with an Aaron Rodgers or maybe a Brett Favre later in his career. You're rolling into a season with Geno Smith as your day one starter on the roster right now. That's scary.
Well, I think it's a fair point what he did in his freshman year with the other coach, but that other coach passed on him. That other coach had a chance to take him, and he didn't take him. This is the coach that knows him better than anybody else. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily, the end-all, but I kind of do wonder why Bill O'Brien wouldn't want this guy. why Houston went and signed Brock Osweiler instead. I mean, they knew Hackenberg was going to be available to them. I mean, nobody thought Hackenberg was going number one. I mean, maybe a year ago you thought Hackenberg may be a top 10 pick, but at this point, everybody knew Hackenberg was going to be available in the second round. So that's a question I have.
The counterpoint to that is you signed Osweiler to a huge deal, and you didn't. If you're Texans, you're sitting there going, I can grab a guy who's proven he can be successful as a quarterback. I mean, I can understand why they didn't, because they're going, why would I get a guy who, waste a second rounder when I have so many other holes to fill? You look at it this way. If the Jets went out and grabbed the defensive lineman in the second round, I'm pretty sure all of us would have screamed because, well, why did we do that when we have so many others? I mean, I get it, but
I wouldn't have screamed. I was the one who was happy about Sheldon when we picked him. I wanted to pick him before the draft, so I wouldn't have screamed. We may lose Wilkerson. I would have been perfectly happy if we got a stud nose tackle. Wouldn't have been a problem at all with me.
So let's go on.
No, it's funny. Somebody said, I'm going to pretend we took Jenkins in the second and Hackenberg in the third. Then I feel better about the draft. That is the life of a Jets fan right there. All right, I'm going to pretend that pick didn't happen when it did. And, suddenly everything looks okay.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the bigger picture of the quarterback position for the Jets. And who do you think the odd man out is?
Got to be Geno, former guy.
Right now there is no odd man out, unless they sign Fitz. All three are going to be in this club, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that's my question. Is do you think how do you think this impacts the Fitz situation?
I read today that they were thinking about signing Fitz to a 1-year contract, which I thought was interesting because that gives them no leverage at all to make the first year cap hit palatable, which is a problem for the Jets because right now, as we speak, they're actually in negative cap space given what they have to commit to down the road. Right now, they already have to cut somebody just to get into the cap by the season start. So if they're signing Fitz to a 1-year contract, say $10 million, that commits them to doing quite a bit of restructuring just to get under the cap. I thought they'd probably do a 2 or 3 year deal, and now if it's just a 1-year deal, it makes it a lot harder for them to sign Fitz, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we started the offseason, Andrew and I on the other podcast, or should I say, the podcast saying, well, we want a 2 or 3 year deal because that'll give you leeway. You make it so that basically he's cuttable after this year. But you look at it, and, I mean, at this point, I have a feeling the Jets are just going to roll with Geno Smith as your starter. You hope to get out with him. And then, if you have to put in a Petty or Hackenberg, you do it. The bigger question is, where does this put Petty? At this point, I think this is going to be his make-or-break year for him. And, if the Jets feel like, oh, he's still a project, you have 2 project quarterbacks. And where does that leave you, not this year, but next year? I mean, that's even worse.
Well, the thing about Petty is, I heard a lot of people say, they ought to throw him out there and see what they have. Well, I think let's see Petty show he can win the backup job before we talk about him as a potential starter. Last year, if, near the end of the season, he was replacing Geno as the second guy active on game day, that would be an indication, he was making real progress. At this point, you don't really know what you have in him. You don't. You don't know how he's going to respond in the off season. You don't know how he's going to develop. So I think at this point, Petty's kind of a wild card. I'd imagine he's still not ready. And when they drafted him last year, they kind of took him on a big arm and the belief that he could develop. But I thought he was still pretty far away. I think I've always felt like Fitzpatrick was the guy they had to bring back. And look, I understand, he's a career journeyman. I understand that there's a real chance he's going to regress. For me, the question is not whether the odds of Fitzpatrick are going to regress. The question is, who gives you the best chance to get quality quarterback play? I think in this system, with these receivers who he did develop chemistry with during the year, that's always been Fitzpatrick. Now, based on the way the draft is played out, I think there are 2 additional reasons to take him. Number one is the Jets did not address the offensive line. I think if you don't take an offensive lineman in the top 3 rounds, you're probably not getting a guy who's going to be able to step in on day one. And even, Brian Winters showed us that, even if you take a guy on day 2, he's not necessarily going to be a quality starter as a rookie. So you need a guy who's going to be able to get the ball out quickly, who's going to be able to move a little bit, scramble if he's under pressure, buy himself some extra time, because this offensive line is not going to be very good. Smack that, as you said, the Jets still need to make moves to maneuver to get themselves under the cap. So Breno Giacomini probably is the guy who would open up the most cap space. I've been thinking for a while the Jets would probably take a tackle early and with the idea of replacing Breno and opening up that cap space. So I don't really know what's going to happen on the offensive line now. They may still have to cut him, and at which point I don't know who's starting. I think the second big thing is by drafting Hackenberg, I do not want Geno to be the veteran placeholder. The Jets have done that the last 2 times. It just doesn't work. They did it with Sanchez when Kellen Clemens was there. They did it with Geno. Sanchez was the guy. It just doesn't work. I just feel like it's a bad situation when you have the old guy, the former guy of the future, so to speak, and he's always the previous GM's guy. The team's already decided to move on. I feel like that's a recipe for getting the new guy thrown in before he's ready.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Clemens, we sat there, and I remember the first year, everybody was, okay, we got a second rounder in Clemens. I'll like this pick. Then it became, all right, we got some issues. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden it's Sanchez. Now it's Geno, and now it's Hackenberg. I mean, at least to the Jets' credit, they're saying, well, we're expected to sit him a year. That's the plan. So at least they're saying that so far, not, hey, we're going to put him in right away. I mean, that's a worst fear right now.
Let's go back to that point about the offensive line for a second. If Greeno is the one who's cut to make cap room, which a lot of people are clamoring for, I mean, as bad as Greeno may be, what happens when Ryan Clady goes down and Greeno's been cut? I would hate to put any quarterback behind that line. I mean, you would ruin anybody. With that. That's the end of the season right there, basically.
And we're talking about the Hackenberg's development was hurt by his offensive line at Penn State. Well, this is if your Jets are going to run this offensive line out there, you don't want Hackenberg back there. That's going to do even more damage, I think.
Right.
I 100% agree, and I said it. I get the need for trying to get a quarterback in the second round. It's a position of need. But what that did was, at this point, now you're looking, okay, we got an offensive linebacker in the third round, rather an outside linebacker. We don't have a single guy in the first 2 days on an offense that isn't a giant question mark. I mean, I just don't get that. I mean, I get it, but it's scary to me. The one position of need is going to be offensive line. We have done nothing to address it at all.
Yeah, even if this year you're okay, I mean, the entire offense is old. From the running back to the offensive line to the receivers, they're all old. So you have to start replenishing their talent, and you really needed to start this year. And the fact that they didn't was a little disappointing, I think.
Yeah, I know McCagnon has mentioned in the past that good teams are able to draft and develop players from the middle to late rounds and undrafted free agents, but I mean, yeah, maybe you can find a guard or two that way. You need to. I mean, this team has been forever since they've made a premium pick on the offensive line, and I guess I can't say that. I mean, the problem is that the two premium picks they have made in recent years were Brian Winters and Vlad Ducasse, which obviously did not pan out. It's been exactly 10 years since they made an early pick on the offensive line, which did work out. DeBrickashaw and Mangold. And it's something we've seen. We've watched the line slowly deteriorate. When you add DeBrickashaw, you think about the line they had 6 years ago, I guess 2009, when they had Faneca, who they had signed Faneca. They had DeBrickashaw and Mangold, the 2 first-round draft picks. They had Faneca who they had brought in as a free agent before 2008, who is a Hall of Fame level player. and Damian Woody, who was they had 4 first-round picks at that point, and now you look at them and like I mean I guess you still have I guess you count Clady and Carpenter's first rounders. These aren't guys who are playing at a first-round level though.
Oh. And it's scary where you're talking about Carpenter being probably your most consistent guy, because at this point, let's be honest here, Mangold's up there in age, and I love him. And, you know, you look at it and you go, I don't know how many years he's got left at this point. 2, 3 before you start to see a big time, where he's unplayable. I mean, that's a rough one there.
Yeah, he was already. I mean, I don't want to say he started to show signs of decline, but he was really banged up last year. He plays a very grueling position, and you start to wonder whether that's going to be the norm. I know he's been very durable during his career, but he's at an age where players do start to get hurt. It is kind of tougher to fend off injuries and recover from injuries. So I think you have to worry about is Mangold ever going to be the same player again?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just going to be interesting. You want to switch to the 3rd round? I mean, because I'm done talking about quarterback at this point. I mean, I think this is we got a residual hate for this pick because of what happened in the 2nd round, but I don't mind this pick. Do you guys?
I like the pick. I think it's a good pick. I think he's a nice replacement for Calvin Pace. I think he'll set the edge well.
Yeah, it's like I said. I wrote this. I kind of liked him as a pass rusher better than the guy from Georgia who went in the 1st round. I mentioned in the thread last night that when Leonard Floyd was drafted, I'm looking at him. I feel like he looked like a safety. He doesn't have the size that I want in a guy who's going to be coming off the edge. I like this pick a lot. I was expecting McCagnon to take a linebacker at some point. He took Malden last year. That was another position that the Jets had just neglected forever. In the Rex era, I think the Rex era was 6 years. The first 5, they did not take an edge rusher at all. The last year, they took IK in the 6th and Riley in the 7th. How many years has the plan at outside linebacker been? Let's just roll with Calvin Pace for another season. So I am glad to see that the Jets are making a point to infuse the outside linebacker position with some young talent, because it's the most important position on defense. You need an edge rusher. You look at the defensive line was excellent last year, but the Jets still were not. I still don't feel like you could say the Jets had a big time pass rush because they didn't have that explosive guy off the edge. Whether this guy will be it, I'm not sure. Whether Malden will be it, I'm not sure. But I'm at least glad that they're making an effort to try and bring in young guys at that position to try to add some juice to what the team's bringing off the edge.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that completely because you look at it and you go, what were the couple biggest needs? You said offensive line, you said outside linebacker, you said linebacker. And, I mean, they did a good job getting guys, inside linebacker, outside linebacker. Say what you want about Lee. I like his versatility. It's a risk. It seems to me that this year the Jets have gone with a lot of, they're toolsy, but they're risky. I mean, you like Lee as the guy who could be the all-around-the-field inside linebacker, but at this point you're wondering, does he have the size for it? Does he have this? This guy... he's not known for necessarily his pass rush, but, I mean, if he could set the edge, I mean, that's key. I mean, that's something we haven't had since Brian Thomas. And, then as Brian Thomas got older and older, it was, at least he sets the edge. I mean, this guy, he'll set the edge, and it's just, all right, can we get anything out of the pass rush? I like the pick personally.
Yeah, I was telling pretty much anybody who would listen in the days leading up to the draft that Lee was a guy I had my eye on for the Jets. I went on to the Miami Dolphins SB Nation website's podcast on Wednesday for their pre-draft show. They were kind of gauging what the rest of the AFC East was doing. And, they asked me what the needs were, and I told them, offensive line, edge rusher. And they asked me, which players I thought the Jets would target. So, I listed guys who played those positions, and I said something to the effect of, if they don't go for one of those guys, I'd like Darren Lee. Now, today SmackDad posted an article, and we discussed this a little bit before we went live on the air. And I said I feel like the article SmackDad posted today proves that people view him as much more insightful than they view me, because last night I was going on how much I love the pick. Today SmackDad posted a very good article, it's pointing out some flaws in his game. I thought it was a fair and balanced article. I really liked it. One of the things I think is kind of silly is whenever somebody declares a pick a total flop before, oh, this guy's a bust, same old Jets, before the guy even sets foot on the field. I mean, it's like I've been saying. Every guy has a chance. We all miss picks. Even the pros miss it. And SmackDown did list some of the things he liked about Lee. I think he's a great fit for this defense. One of the things that that really impresses me about him is just how explosive he is. How much ground he covers when he sees the ball in front of him. There's a guy, and he's not a very famous guy when it comes to draft circles. His name is Dave T. Thomas, and he's the head scout of the NFL. And he's actually been working in the league since 1968, when he was 14 years old. He helps the league put together its draft guide, and he actually for much of his career he's been a consultant with more than half the teams in the league. And he's the guy who he really knows his stuff, and he has very strong opinions. He doesn't love everybody, but nobody's perfect 100% of the time. But I was reading his blog, and he has extensive reports on a number of these prospects, and he just goes on and on about how much he loves Lee. And it's interesting because he has a lot of inside information. And one thing that I didn't realize is that Lee was actually hurt for much of the 2015 season. He was playing injured, and that was something people didn't really know about. And another thing that came up about Lee was his. A lot of people said he wasn't good in coverage, and they cited stats. They came up in particular from Pro Football Focus, and when I was watching Lee, I felt like I wasn't 100% sure where they were. PFF was getting those numbers from, because I'll be honest, I like their site, but some of their grades kind of lead me to scratch my head. I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with everything that they say they see on the film. Anyway, so this guy Dave T. Thomas, and maybe I'll do a story over the weekend and I'll link it. He says that he charted Lee, and Lee allowed a completion percentage of 18.42% on passes against him. And it's a very interesting article he has, because he actually lists at the end of the article. He lists how Lee's performance in certain games. He talks about what his assignments were at given points against the run and against the pass. And I think that's an important thing to point out is, you watch a guy and you wonder why he did that, and sometimes you blame him for doing something, but sometimes that's the play that's called. He's doing, you may say he's running himself, he ran himself into the wrong area, but the play calls for him to do a certain thing, and somebody else blows a responsibility. So I'm just throwing it out there. I think one of the things I've learned about draft evaluation is, the longer I've done things on this site, the less sure I am about prospects, just because when you make definitive statements, you're going to be wrong. You learn that nobody's smart enough to know everything about the draft. So I think it was a very SmackDown. I thought your article today was great. I thought it was very balanced. I thought you did a good job backing up your points. But I think that this guy Dave T. Thomas wrote an article that was very interesting. It kind of countered some of the points. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think a lot of people who were in favor of Lee are kind of muted in their praise. I think Lee's got a chance to be a very good player. I think he fits this defense like a glove. I think that the defense, one of the things he's really good at is when he sees a kind of a crease in the block, he's exploding through it and getting to the ball. I feel like that's what this defensive system is predicated on, creating opportunities for a player like this.
Yeah, the big question with him isn't so much is he have the speed, but does it translate to the NFL? I look at all these guys you hear, oh, he's got a great motor, he's got great speed, and they don't translate. Look at Aaron Maven. Obviously that's a totally different situation, but he had one mode and one mode only. With some of these other guys, you're just going, okay, can they translate? Obviously he's smaller. I like some of the college things you brought up. Pro Football Focus obviously was not high on him. And a lot of the other sites were, saying, it's a middling pick. But, I mean...
a couple of weeks ago, I was on this website. It wasn't a football website. It was a basketball website. I was actually doing a little homework on the way certain basketball offenses, the way their systems run, and I stumbled on this page. It got me thinking, and it talked about, various coaches in basketball, and it asked, why don't more coaches adapt to the talent that they have? And it said because most of these coaches come up the ranks and they learn one particular system, and maybe they know some of the general things about other systems, but really to install a certain system in a sport, you need to know the nuances so that you can teach a player what to do in every conceivable situation. When he was a young coach, John Madden, who obviously went on to become a football broadcaster, but he was also a great coach, told this story about how he went to this coaching seminar done by Vince Lombardi, and Lombardi spoke for 8 hours, and for 8 hours he spoke about one particular play, which was the Packers sweep. And he went on and on about how if the defender takes a step this way, you throw this block at this angle. It was very, very detailed things like that. And and it's something like this is the advantage the New England Patriots have with a coach like Bill Belichick. Belichick learned at a very young age. He studied football from when he was a kid. There was a story in Grantland about how he went before he was a kid. After he did his homework, his father, who was a famous football scout, would give him kind of football homework where he'd learn all these different styles of play in football. And there's this one story about how when Belichick was 10, he was telling some coach how he should install a different system. And you look at the way the Patriots do things. Obviously, Tom Brady's a lot of their success, but it always amazes me how seamlessly they kind of transfer between systems. One year there'll be a 3-4 base, another year there'll be a 4-3 base. They'll switch between a man-heavy scheme on defense, a zone-heavy scheme. And one thing that always comes to mind is Belichick says, don't tell me, there's this story that Belichick around the draft board says, don't tell me what a player can't do, tell me what he can do, and I'll figure out a way to fit him into our defense. That's because, Belichick knows enough that he feels comfortable running any kind of defense. And I'm not going to compare Todd Bowles to Belichick, obviously, but I think Bowles is very much a student of the game. He's very adaptable. He's very creative. He really studies different ways he can use players, and he used a player who's kind of similar to Lee in Dejon Buchanan and had a lot of success with him in Arizona. So I feel like, last night when the Jets were making their selection, they saw Lee on the board. They probably had him as their top-rated player. Bowles kind of understood how he could get this player to thrive within this defense. I think he definitely fits needs that the team has, and I think Bowles is going to know how to use him.
Yeah, I can see that. Mac, I mean, your thought about it, I think you brought up something good. Rex only ran one defense. Bowles can do multiple, and I think this is a guy that you like in Bowles who can run him 8 different ways, 8 different styles, and still get something out of him. Mac, your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure. Probably the way I write and probably the way I talk is probably comes across as more critical than I actually feel about the player. I think there's good things to see in this player. I think that he definitely has. Well, I said in the article, there's things he's going to do really well. You're going to have wow plays out of this guy, and this guy has such an extraordinary burst that he will make plays in the backfield that other guys in the Jets don't have the ability to make. They cannot make those plays. This guy can make those plays. And I agree with John that a lot of what the draft is not necessarily, especially later rounds, but also in the first round, is not necessarily worrying about oh, this guy can't do this, that guy can't do that. It's what does he do really well, and does that fit with what we're trying to accomplish? So, yeah, if Bowles has a real idea of what he wants to do with this player, and it works out, then yeah, it could be a great pick. I just pointed out what I thought were some of the issues with this player that people were. This is a common thing. The guy is incredibly fast for a linebacker, for a guy that size, and the immediate thing that some people say, "Oh, look at how fast he is; he can cover anybody," and I just don't think that's really true. Demario Davis was fast for a linebacker. He was very fast. He couldn't cover anybody, and I didn't see in the tape great coverage skills by this guy, especially in man-to-man. I thought he got destroyed man-to-man, frankly. But that doesn't mean that's the way you'll use him. So yeah, how you use him is a key thing, and I don't think it's impossible for this guy to be a really special player for us. I just pointed out the things I thought were not particularly impressive on tape. Another thing about the tape, though, is that you don't get to see all the games. I don't watch college football on a regular basis. I watch, draft breakdown tapes, and they don't have all the games. And there's plenty of games I have never seen of this player. So there's certainly a possibility. There's a lot he's shown that I didn't see. And there was also some special plays he made, which I didn't mention in the article. One I saw where he whiffed on the tackle at the line of scrimmage. I mean, he terrible tackle, but 20 yards down, the running back is running full out, and this guy catches up from behind. After he whiffed, he's on the ground. The linebacker, he's on the ground. He gets up. He catches him 20 yards downfield from behind. I mean, you just don't see that anywhere, anytime. That it was a really extraordinary play. So yeah, there definitely is a possibility this guy can do great things for the Jets. I was just trying to point out what I saw on the tape. I don't think I was overly critical, but I guess it probably came out that way.
No, I honestly, I mean, I don't think anybody said you're overly critical. I mean, you could, as my opinion is, you could look at a guy and be overly critical. I'm overly critical sometimes to a fault on the chalkboards. A lot of times I'm just trying to show, hey, this is where the defense went wrong. This is what happened. And then you get some other guys that you just look at and you go, well, I'm going to give him a pass. You brought up a lot of points that were absolutely true about him. You worry about, can he do certain things well? But the one thing you can't question is his speed. I mean, that's pretty much where we're at with him.
Yeah.
All right, so let's change topics a little bit, and I think at this point, at least my read on this is, I think Muhammad Wilkerson is going to be a Jet in 2016. I think the point for trading him is gone. At this point, if you deal him, you're looking at 2017 picks, and if that's the case, then I would say just play out the year. I think there's some risk. Obviously there's some risk he may decline, he may get hurt, but if worst comes to worst, the same offer is probably going to be on the table if you franchise him again next year. What are your guys' thoughts on Wilkerson's short-term and long-term future on the team?
I think this is his last year. I don't think there's any chance at all that, well, that's an exaggeration, but I think there's a very small chance that he remains a Jet after 2016. I agree with you, John. He's going to be a Jet in 2016. After that, I mean, these guys have been negotiating for 2 years, and there's never been any indication that they're even close. And Wilkerson doesn't seem particularly interested in even negotiating with the Jets anymore. I'm not sure the Jets are interested in negotiating with him either. Every time that you get quotes from the Jets, they're sort of lukewarm. They're sort of like, yeah, well, we're trying. Like when the draft was happening last year, well, we'll get to him after the draft. Well, because somehow it's going to be a distraction, the negotiations. But, they managed to get through that distraction with Revis in about 24 hours, but somehow Wilkerson's distraction was because it's going to totally screw up the draft process. I mean, it never made a lot of sense what they were saying, because I don't think they were telling the truth. I think that basically they were not interested in signing this player for the kind of money this player was looking for. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think Wilkerson's demands are going to change. I think he's gone next year. I suppose it's possible that they once again use the franchise tag, but it would be so prohibitively expensive that it doesn't seem like a very wise move. I suppose it could be done, but I don't see him signing a long-term contract with the Jets at this point. I don't think that's a realistic expectation.
To counterpoint you guys and just play devil's advocate, we talked about cutting Breno but obviously Muhammad Wilkerson's cap number is gigantic because of the franchise. Maybe the Jets just look at him and go, hey, man, you know what? Let's figure out a deal, knock your cap number down this year, and work something out long term. I mean, they're not going to have many options, and with the draft coming out the way it is, cutting Breno doesn't seem like a great option. Maybe it's, hey, Wilkerson, let's work something out now. We fooled around long enough. We puttered around the issue. Let's work a long-term deal out. This way we'll restructure Breno instead of actually having to cut him and figure a way out. Maybe that's the goal, is say, hey, you know what, at this point, that's the best option we have, long-term, short-term, everything. I mean, that's a hope, but at the same point, if you're Wilkerson, like you said, it reminds me of the John Abraham situation from years ago, where we franchise tagged him, and then the next year we just traded him away. I mean, at some point you have to decide, if you're the Jets, is this guy in your plans or is this guy not? If he's not in your plans, then you know what? Maybe you start looking training camp, getting rid of him for a first or a second rounder, whatever you can get out of him, and then you know what? You move on. Or number two, you look at him and you go, let's work this thing out before we get to training camp.
Well, I think something that plays into this is, if you deal Wilkerson, and I feel like you're kind of committing yourself that you're going to try and lock Sheldon Richardson up for the long term, I think a point in keeping Wilkerson for another year is I don't think I'm at a point where I feel totally safe about giving Sheldon Richardson a long-term deal. I mean, part of it's obviously what happened last offseason. There were obviously multiple problems, and he is a guy who is potentially one other issue away from being at a long suspension. The other problem though is as little progress as the Jets have made. I don't even know whether they've tried to negotiate with Wilkerson. I'm not sure Richardson's going to be much easier to negotiate with. Now I have the quote in front of me that he gave. It was back in June of 2015 last year. He was talking about Wilkerson's contract situation, but he was also talking about himself. He said, "We don't want J.J. Watt money. We want it all. We want Sue money." So I'm not sure you're necessarily going to walk into a negotiation with Sheldon Richardson and have a guy who's going to leave money on the table to stay with the Jets. So I think, if I'm the Jets, I want to wait to play this out a little longer, because I might get to a point, even if I'm not that interested in locking up Wilkerson right now, which I think they should be. People talk about the way the other money could be spent. I think in the NFL that's much easier said than done. Yeah, in theory you can spend the $15 million, if you get a couple of good free agents, but you also may whiff on free agents. I think back to the Revis trade where people said Revis wasn't worth $16 million. They said the Jets would be able to spend that money better in better ways. Well, look what happened 2 years later. 2 years later, they're in such dire shape at cornerback that they end up giving Revis that $16 million.
I agree with you 100%. Is you look at the Stephen Ridley deal. Maybe a player doesn't develop. I mean, you have to look at it multiple ways. You can't just assume that the players are going to come in and be, you're going to fill two needs perfectly. You have to assume, there's going to be a risk. If you have a surefire thing, sometimes it's just wise to go, hey, I'm going to pay the surefire thing rather than take a risk and end up with a bust and end up having to fill two spots instead of just one.
Yeah, I think it's probably the right move to tie them up. I just don't think either side is gonna come close to satisfying the other side's demands. They've had 2 years to negotiate, and it doesn't seem to me that they've gotten anywhere. I don't see any reason why now that's going to change. I think that both sides kind of harden in their position. The way I read it, I don't think it's going to get done. I think it should get done, but I don't think it will get done.
Reminds me of a lot of the Ryan Fitzpatrick. The report came out that he was looking for double what the Jets amount. I mean, I said, geez, they're not even talking the same language in the same book. I mean, they're talking two different subjects. I mean, when you're talking, you're wanting double. Okay, you're talking lower rung salary. That's doable. But when you're talking about that much of a difference, that doesn't scream to me that, give it another week. They're hammering out some final details. That sounds like, this is probably not happening at all.
Yeah, I think the Fitzpatrick situation. You can kind of see where both sides are coming from. Fitzpatrick's looking at the market for a guy like Sam Bradford, and he's saying, when Sam Bradford ever had a season like I did last year. Meanwhile, the Jets are looking at him, and the Jets are saying, "Look, you're a journeyman. You haven't had any success before you came here. There's no market for you." And truthfully, I think the Jets are probably more accurate. I think at the end of the day, my guess is that Fitzpatrick does end up re-signing with the Jets for, maybe a little more than they're offering right now. But I don't think the Jets are going to budge much. As far as Wilkerson goes, though, I think Wilkerson actually deserves the money, and I can't say I don't totally understand why the Jets haven't been more interested in signing him because you do have two young stars who play a similar role. But at the same time, I mean, this is a guy who had 12 sacks last year. He's had 10 sacks 2 of the last 3 seasons. I thought he was the best player on the defense last year, and I feel like you're at a point where Sheldon Richardson is going to play. I think this is the last year of his rookie deal. Next year he's on his 5th-year option, which the Jets will pick up. Williams is still on his rookie year deal for 3 more years. He has another 5th-year option. I'd kind of like to keep these guys together. I know that you're not necessarily maximizing all of them. Somebody will have to play defensive end at some point. Maybe you take some of them off the field. Maybe you go with more 3-man lines with one of these guys in the middle. Trying to create a mismatch against interior linemen. But you're at a point where you're still a long time away from the point where all 3 of these guys are going to command major money. And it's like I said earlier, I just feel like when you have a premium player, you're almost always better locking him up than the alternative because it's very difficult to spend money efficiently on the free agent market. There just really aren't many difference makers who get out there. You could say, well, you can upgrade other positions, but most of the real, I mean, how many genuine difference makers make it to the market? Every year you hear X guy is going to be a free agent, Y guy is going to be a free agent. And then their team ends up re-signing them. It's just not a league where the immense talent changes hands frequently, and when it does, it could be like in Ndamukong Suh, where you sign a guy to a contract so ludicrous that it's almost not worth it.
Yeah, I see the logic in that.
Yeah, the NFL I think is different than the other sports too, in that just because you've had huge success in one system, one team, doesn't mean it translates to other teams nearly as much as, say, in baseball or even in basketball. So I think, tying up your best players is a better strategy in the NFL probably than any other sport.
Yeah, look no further than Jonathan Vilma, real quick. 3-4 went from a 4-3 dominant player, went into a 3-4, was meh, went back to a 4-3, and became a stud again for the Saints. Just pointing that out.
Yeah, I think guys who are stars like Brandon Marshall, no matter what you have them play, they're going to be successful. But there are other guys whose skill sets are much more limited, and it depends on their position. And I think Fitzpatrick actually is a good example of that, where other teams aren't going to pay him based on the success he had in the Jets offense. He has some skills that make him a fit in the Jets offense. He's not necessarily Again, I don't want to make Fitzpatrick out to be more than he is. He's been a career journeyman. He's been a guy who's been average to maybe a little below average for most of his career, even in the years he played in this system in Buffalo. But I think he's in that sense he's probably more valuable to the Jets than he is any other team, and that's one of the reasons he's having trouble finding a new deal on the market from another suitor.
Just to point something out, we got a person in the thread who wants us to start fighting and stop having a beer. So. John, I'm officially challenging you to a knife fight as of right now.
I told Smack Dad earlier today that we should yell at each other about Darren Lee since we disagree with him. No, I mean, look, some people are going to be frustrated with the picks. I understand it. I see the guy who's there. The guy, he's a very smart guy. Leaves a lot of smart posts. He's a very astute guy when it comes to the draft. I just happen to disagree with him on Lee. I think Lee's a great pick, and this is not a case where I'm just saying it because the Jets picked him. I was saying in the days leading up to it that I really liked this particular player. So I wanted to kind of change our tone, change the discussion. Let's talk more about the league in general right now. Is there another team out there that you really liked what they did, what they've done in the first 2 days of the draft?
Jacksonville. I love what Jacksonville has done. That defense has a chance to be special if these guys pan out, including Fowler coming back this year.
Yeah, I think adding Ramsey, Ramsey may have been as close to a Leonard Williams situation as you'd have this year, where a guy a lot of people thought was the best player in the draft falls all the way to 5. And then you get Miles Jack in the second round, who, fell probably because of medical concerns, who, a lot of people thought was one of the, there are people out there who thought he was one of the 10 best players in the draft. And then you add Fowler, who, missed all of last season. He got hurt shortly after they drafted him. So you can make a case that they added three top 10 level talents to that defense.
See, you guys, the one thing I hate about the draft is I hate the guy who won the draft. I'd love to see the post about 4 years ago who won the draft compared to who actually won the draft. You know what I mean? Like, I would love to see them side by side because, yes, I agree with you that on paper Jacksonville added a ton of talent. But to me, it's just like, hey, we're sitting here not even through halfway through the draft, and I'm like, I don't know how any of these guys are going to turn out. Christian Hackenberg may be the next Tom Brady, or it could be the next Tuiasa Sopo. I mean, there's so many things that could happen that I just look and I go, hey, you know what? Let's play the season, and then we'll go back. I mean, what was it? 2 years ago, we were killing the Jets for not taking Mark Barron, and look what he's done ever since. I mean, not much.
Well, with that in mind, I'm going to give you my team that I really like what they did. I kind of had two teams. One of them was Jacksonville, so I'll let SmackDad have that one. The other team that I like what they did in the first 2 rounds was Dallas. I know a lot of people think the running back position has been devalued, but I love Ezekiel Elliott in that situation. It's kind of tough to judge Dallas because Romo was hurt for all of last year. I love Ezekiel Elliott running behind that line. Back 2 years ago, DeMarco Murray was so important for that team. The fact that they were, they really felt like they based everything off the run. It made Romo better, made their offense better, and I don't think you're going to get the same impact. Even Darren McFadden had some success behind that line last year. I like the addition of Alfred Morris in Dallas, but you had a guy in Elliott who is one of the most talented. I mean, just in terms of pure talent, if we take position out of it, he was one of the most talented players in this class, and I think he'd be my way too early pick for Rookie of the Year because he's running behind that line with Romo and Dez Bryant. You're not going to be able to really load the box against him. So I just think that was a great addition. And then today in the second round, they got Jalen Smith. And Jalen Smith is kind of a risky pick because he suffered that serious knee injury in the Fiesta Bowl. You may end up losing him. He sounds like he may not play this year. So you kind of question whether he'll return. But here's the thing: is that the Dallas doctor, apparently the guy who did his surgery works for the Cowboys. So I think you can guess that if if they're taking him in the second round, they have it on pretty good authority that he's going to be okay. This is a guy who was generating top 10 buzz before that injury. The question for him has always been, I mean, there are two questions. The question is, will he ever be the player? Will he ever again be the same player? And question number 2 is, can you deal with him potentially missing his rookie year? And I think one of the things that makes it difficult to take a guy like that is the NFL's a year-to-year league. You see it each season. A team has a disappointing year and the general manager gets fired. So a GM who's looking at a player who may not contribute this year may be saying, you know what, I got to save my job. I need a guy who can help me this year because otherwise I may not be able to reap the fruits of the labor because that guy will be helping the next GM. In Dallas, Dallas is kind of a weird dynamic, and I'm not saying I'd want Jerry Jones as my GM, but that is in a weird way, I feel like Jerry being their GM kind of helped them because Jerry knows he's not going anywhere, so Jerry actually can't afford to have patience. So that was a team that I kind of liked what they did.
Yeah, I mean, I could see why. I get what they were doing, and like you said, you don't know, but I figure it this way: either the knee heals or whatever he injured. I forget what exactly it was. Or Dallas finds a new doctor in the offseason. One of two things are going to happen. It's just one of those that you look at a team like Dallas who filled needs. You look like a team like Jacksonville that got a ton of talent. Where do you put the Jets in all this? Do you put them at the bottom of the totem pole, or where do you put them?
I liked the first round pick. As I said, I like the first round pick. I know some people disagree with that. I think Lee is going to be a great fit for this defense. I really like the third round pick. One of the big problems with this team, and unfortunately it's kind of an old team, and I think to a large extent that's due to how poorly they drafted late in the Tannenbaum era, and to a lesser extent Idzik, but Idzik was only around 2 years. They're missing a lot. A lot of the guys who would be on second, I mean, there are pretty much no guys who are here on second contracts. So that money, that was the big reason the Jets have had all that cap space, under Idzik and then the first year of Maccagnan, is that, you could talk about cap management. Jets didn't have any players that were worth any draft picks who were worth extending to big money deals. If you don't have any good players, you're going to have a lot of cap space. So to replace that, what they did was they signed a bunch of guys. Well, when you wade into free agency, a lot of the big money deals go to guys who are older. And, I don't think you can question them being big players in free agency because they had to. I mean, otherwise you're sending out a non-competitive team. But the fact of the matter is that that also means that the Jets have an old roster where they have a lot of players who are going to need to be replaced. Linebacker was one of those areas where the Jets definitely skewed older. They needed young talent, and now they've added 2 guys in the first 3 rounds. And they also, they added Malden last year, so suddenly this linebacking core is looking a lot younger. And I think in this defense, it's linebacker is a very important spot. So I like what they did. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of Hackenberg, but we'll see what happens. I mean, I don't know that he's. That's. I don't like the pick, but I've certainly done wrong before. So we'll see what happens there. Overall, though, I really like 2 of the 3 picks. I think they've done a nice job upgrading the young talent on defense.
Yeah, the thing about picking a quarterback this high is that if he hits, it just swamps everything else. I mean, if Hackenberg somehow becomes this really good quarterback, it doesn't really matter what happens to the other players. I mean, it's nice to have them hit too, but that alone will make this draft a huge success. But let's assume he's a total washout. I like the third round pick, and I think you got a starter, a long-term starter maybe for the third round. That's a good haul for your third round pick. So for me, this draft, unless you get some sort of miracle down in the 4th and 7th rounds, this draft is going to come down to the first round pick. And if he's really good, then it turns out to be a fairly successful draft. And if he's a bust, then what you got is one starter. That's going to be a pretty bad haul. So I think it really all comes down to the first rounder.
Yeah, well, you never know. Maybe we could find the next Jalen Saunders in the 4th round.
Who?
True, you never know.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to point out something here. I think it's one of these. Okay, the first pick, the 2 of the 3 picks are literally boom or bust potential. Lee is a boom or bust guy, and obviously, Hackenberg is probably your. I mean, I don't think there's any middle ground. I don't think if you drafted him this high, you could get away with, he turned into a journeyman QB. This is the guy you want for the future. That being said, I like what they did with the 3rd pick. To me, it's one of those drafts so far that you go, this is going to be a punt. Let me punt and see what happens in 3 years, because Hackenberg is that's just a risky pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily sure it would be entirely accurate to say Mike Maccagnan has staked his job on this, only from the standpoint that Hackenberg was only a 2nd-round pick, so you're not talking about a major financial commitment. It still is, within the realm of possibility that the Jets could still, take another quarterback in the next year or 2. The 2nd-round pick is not necessarily an insubstantial commitment. I don't think they would have taken it if they didn't have some confidence, if they didn't want to give him a shot. So, this is, again, I think it might be too extreme to say this is a career-defining pick for Maccagnan. But I think it is a very significant pick. I think we may look back at it as perhaps his most important pick when all is said and done.
Yeah, I mean, who thought that Bryce Petty last year, would end up being a not so controversial QB pick in the grand scheme of things? I mean, I remember you last year, not very happy with the Bryce Petty pick, and that's probably putting it a little lightly. But this year, the amount of I would almost want to say it's an outrage over this pick is staggering. So this is a deeply unpopular pick with a lot of fans, and obviously, when you get a pick like this, it's just going to be interesting.
Well, let me tell you something. I told you this before we went live. Is over the last 2 years, there have been 4 quarterbacks that I did not want the Jets to pick. I'll name you those 4 quarterbacks. One was Brett Hundley, who went to Green Bay last year. One was Cardale Jones this year, and the other 2 were Bryce Petty and Christian Hackenberg. So I guess as much as I like a lot of what Maccagనం's done, I guess he doesn't really listen to me much when it comes to the quarterback position.
I did not want Geno Smith for the record, but when he fell to the second round, you had to take him. That's more. I don't blame that. I don't blame Idzik or anybody for that pick. That was such a look. We're done with Sanchez. Give us anybody. And Geno fell into your lap. That's one of those you have to take him. As much in hindsight it sucked, you had to take him at the time.
You have to try and make something happen at the quarterback position. And even if I think Maccagnan seems to be a believer in the Ron Wolf method, which is you take a quarterback each year. And the analogy I use is you get into the late rounds, and let's be honest, once you get past the 3rd round, I mean most of the good quarterbacks go in the top 3 rounds. Once you get into the late rounds, the odds are very much against you. But the value of hitting on the quarterback is so high that I almost equate it to one of those Powerball lottery, one of those Powerball nights when the jackpot gets up to like 800, 900 million. You spend your $2, like just kind of like what a 6th or 7th round pick is, because not that you're expected to win. It's just the prize you get if you hit it is so large that it's worth the gamble. So I mean I can appreciate what Maccagnan's doing. I appreciate the fact that he's trying to make something happen at the quarterback position. And now you have 2 lottery tickets now. People were saying I've seen this theory that picking a quarterback this year means you're giving up on Bryce Petty. It's not. Look, you're hoping Bryce Petty hits. There's a difference between saying there's no chance Bryce Petty hits and saying I am banking literally everything on Bryce Petty being my quarterback of the future. Now if Petty becomes a great quarterback and Hackenberg kind of falls off, nobody's going to talk about that. They'll just be happy that you have a quarterback.
Absolutely.
Guys, we're supposed to argue, so I got nothing. Just to be that guy.
To take this to another team, I think about what the Rams did, and I got to be honest, I'm not as sold. I'm not that sold, or also the Eagles. I'm not sold enough on Jared Goff or Carson Wentz that I necessarily would have made those moves. But I can understand the theory behind it because, you think about it. I don't know about you guys, but even like a guy who's not necessarily an Aaron Rodgers, but a guy who's just, a guy who's good like Matt Ryan or Joe Flacco, if one of those teams calls me up and offers me, one of those quarterbacks for that package of picks, I'm probably going to do it just because having a good quarterback is so important. Are you necessarily guaranteed a winner just because you have a quarterback if you don't surround him with anything? Of course not, but it really is a prerequisite to win in this league. It's very difficult to win without a quarterback, and I know the response is going to be, well, look at the defense Denver built. Well, I'm not sure. Let's see how Denver does this year. They're going to have Sanchez. They're going to have a rookie quarterback. Everybody always talks about the 2000 Ravens. This was a point I made in the comment today on the site, is that nobody remembers what happened after that year. The years between 2001 and 2007, that's a 7-year stretch. The Ravens had a top 6 defense in yards allowed, and it was just a great defense. It had Hall of Famers on every level. They had a top 6 defense in 6 of those 7 years. They won 1 playoff game in that span. They won the Super Bowl in 2000. Yes, that was a legendary defense. But they also squandered a number of years after that by not having a quarterback. 2001, they beat Miami in a wild card game. They lose to a really good Pittsburgh team in the divisional round. So be it. 2002, they missed the playoffs. 2003, they lose a wild card game at home to Tennessee, where they are starting Anthony Wright at quarterback. 04, 05 they missed the playoffs. 06 they lose a brutal game at home. They have Steve McNair, who's kind of past his prime and declined. They lose, I think it was like 15-6. They lose to the Colts. Their defense holds Peyton Manning to 5 field goals, and they lose by 9. 07 they have a horrible year. So you can catch lightning in a bottle once if you build like a great defense, and great defense that carries a quarterback. But I'm not sure that's necessarily a recipe to win, to sustain a winner in this league. And I think it's very easy to forget that, everybody has the lasting memory of Denver in the Super Bowl, but this was a team that was close to falling to a wild card Week 17 in the second half against San Diego. Their offense was really struggling. In fact, they were on the ropes in the divisional round against Pittsburgh before a guy fumbles on the Steelers. So, a quarterback position is just so important in this league that I understand. Even though I don't like, I guess I don't agree. I don't think the prospects can't miss enough to justify that trade. But I at least understand the theory behind it. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, the problem with trying to win with a defense like that is you can't keep it together. There's too many moving parts. Guy gets injured one year, another guy goes to free agency the next year. You can't keep those guys together, but you can keep a quarterback for 10 years at the highest level. And that, if you want a consistent winner, it's very difficult to keep a top. I mean, you can keep them in the top 10, but that's not going to win you a Super Bowl. These teams that win the Super Bowl with just their defense, you're talking about the best defense in the league, and you just can't keep that together for long.
Yeah, and I hate to be this guy. I used to be the guy defense win. To me, the best defense always wins in the playoffs. But look, you got to have a good QB at this point. I mean, it's pretty obvious that that's where you win and lose games. Is Hackenberg the guy? I don't know. I don't think so. Obviously, John B doesn't, and I'm not sure that you do. I mean, this is just look. Two things could happen. He gets really, really good, and the Jets have a solid defense, or he sucks, and in 2 years we rinse, we repeat with another GM, another head coach, and more than likely another quarterback. I mean, that's pretty much the way I look at it. And when you're talking about two teams in the last, 20 years now that have won Super Bowls with no quarterback and a studded defense, that should tell you something.
And we may be in the era, where the passing game is becoming more and more relevant. But if you study NFL history, you've always needed a good quarterback to win. It's not, this is not some recent phenomenon. You don't necessarily need, the greatest quarterback to win, but you need a good guy. Look at some of the successful coaches in today's NFL. Look at Bill Belichick and look at what his record was in Cleveland before he had Brady. How about Pete Carroll? Look at his record with the Jets, with New England, and even in Seattle the couple of years before he had Russell Wilson. A lot of coaches look bad before they have a quarterback.
And can I bring up something real quick? Because this triggered a thought I had earlier today. A lot of people said, well, why would you take Hackenberg in the second round? Well, how about this? Russell Wilson dropped to the third round, right? If you're a team that picks after Seattle and had the chance for him in the second round and said, I think this guy is going to be a stud, and look at what happened. Now you're kicking yourself years and years later because you didn't take him in the second round, because at that time it was considered a reach.
But were you pounding the table for him?
What's that?
But were you pounding the table for him? That's what I want to know.
Oh, no. But my point is, if you're the Jets and you thought that he was the best quarterback available, and you're saying this guy's going to be a stud, then you draft him where you think you draft him. Draft boards be damned, fans be damned. Just, you have to make sure that you are right, because if you are wrong, you are going to get it for your entire career.
Well, I think a lot of GMs, one of the reasons that they don't pull the trigger on a quarterback is that they're afraid that people will call them dumb. They're afraid that if you have a guy in place, like the Petty situation, and I'll give McCagnon credit for this, is that a lot of GMs out there are afraid of being called dumb. They're afraid of saying, oh, well, you're admitting you made a mistake doing this. Well, it doesn't really work out that way. The Seattle example, who remembers what they did, who they signed in that 2012 offseason? Who remembers them giving Matt Flynn, I don't want to say a huge deal, but they gave Matt Flynn a decent deal. Matt Flynn never starts a game for them. Who cares? Because they found Russell Wilson. That's all anybody remembers. All is forgiven if you win. A lot of these GMs, I think a lot of GMs in that spot would say, well, I don't want to look. People will call me dumb if the people will say I'm giving up on Flynn. I didn't give Flynn a shot. All is forgiven if you find a quarterback. I just feel like you got to give yourself as many chances as possible.
Yeah, and I mean the idea of flood the draft with quarterbacks isn't exactly a new science. I mean, look at what Green Bay did the one year. Would they draft 3 quarterbacks that year with Aaron Rodgers, or was it just 2? I forget.
Well,
because that was the year they got the 3 quarterbacks. Because it was Matt Flynn, help me out here, Aaron Rodgers, and the one late in the draft, I think from LSU.
Okay, well, it was what they did was they took Rodgers in 2005, and Rodgers was the backup for 3 years. Then Favre retired before the 2008 season, and before he came back, before all the Jets stuff. What they did was Rodgers was going into the season as a starter, so what they did was they drafted Brian Braum out of Louisville in, I believe, the 2nd round, and then they took Flynn later in the draft. And, actually I remember that. A lot of people were wondering, are they hedging their bets on Rodgers? And, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. What happened? Braum, the guy they took early, didn't really pan out. He really didn't amount to anything in the NFL. He only started a handful of games, bounced around to a few different spots. Flynn ended up being, a decent backup for them. He played a couple decent games for Green Bay. You don't want to make it more than what he was, but I think for where they drafted him, he ended up being a success story. And that's the other thing is we're talking about examples. I think about back in 2012 when Washington drafted Kirk Cousins in the 4th round right after they drafted RG3. Everybody asked, are they crazy? Well, now Cousins, and I'm not the biggest Cousins guy in the world, but he did do better than I thought he was last year. He helped lead them to a division title. The other thing people forget is is just how valuable having a good backup. That first year when RG3 was great, Cousins went in and won a big game in Cleveland for them when RG3 was hurt. In fact, in retrospect, it's kind of puzzling why they didn't just shut RG3 down until he was healthy and let Cousins kind of play out that season. You wonder, you always wonder how history would have played out differently. So I think, again, I can see. I don't love this. My issue is more the player, and again, I've been wrong before, so I hope Hackenberg's great. I hope everybody comes back and laughs at me over this particular evaluation that I had tonight. But I don't think you ever fault somebody for trying to improve their quarterback position.
No, I think you can fault them for who they choose to try and upgrade their quarterback position, and that's what a lot of fans are doing right now. Is going, Christian Hackenberg, that's your solution? But I don't think you can fault them for attempting it. It's just, it's procedure and execution. Procedure, upgrade quarterback position. How do you do it? 2nd round. Okay, who'd you do it with? Hackenberg. All right. Not exactly what we were hoping for.
So I think we're probably nearing the end. I wanted to know, we talked about what team you liked, and Nick, don't get mad at me, but I'm going to ask, is there any team out there where you're kind of scratching your head over what they do, and don't tell me the Jets?
Well, you just ruined everything I had going for me, so go ahead.
I don't know why the Giants still have Reese on the payroll. He's awful. And he just keeps on making mistake after mistake, and the team is paying the price for it. They have a quarterback that can take him to the Super Bowl, and they're just wasting his years. That they got to let that guy go.
Well, here's the thing I don't get is, look, I think it was probably time for Coughlin to go. It seemed like his message had kind of grown stale in the locker room. Here's what I don't get, though, is, you look at the Giants, that defense was awful. That defense had no talent, and I think the amount of money they've had to spend to rebuild that defense kind of bears it out. So they keep Reese, they keep the guy that built that team around, and then they promote the offensive coordinator and keep the defensive coordinator. It's like, are you telling me Tom Coughlin was the only problem with that team?
He was the problem.
100%, he was the problem child.
And look, Coughlin. I know people get on Todd Bowles for his game management. Coughlin made some egregious late-game decisions last year that really contributed to a lot of their losses. But the guy's a great coach. He won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants. He built that Jacksonville team from the ground up. he made some personnel mistakes. The end of his time in Jacksonville was not good. Their salary cap situation was ugly. Based on some mistakes he made on the personnel side. But the Jacksonville owner has always said that his biggest regret was just not stripping Coughlin of his personnel duties, because that team really struggled after he left. And I think it was time for him to go, but I can't get over the fact that the Giants decided to change nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great move. Hey, yeah, everything else is fine. It's basically the Titanic going, all right, look, we're going to replace the captain, but we're just going to keep cruising here because everything looks good. We just hit an iceberg. Yeah, but we took out the captain. Everything's good to go on this thing.
Here's another team where the other team, I guess this is kind of the low-hanging fruit. It's the Rams. It's not necessarily. I talked about the theory behind them trading up for the quarterback. Here's what bothers me about the Rams is that you have a coach and a GM who, frankly, are lucky to still have a job based on the lack of success they've had. And so they're thinking about, they're probably out of there if they don't make the playoffs this year. And there is nothing more dangerous in the NFL than when what's in the best interest of the head coach and the GM differ from what's in the long-term interest of the team. Because maybe these guys think that Jared Goff is the next great NFL quarterback, a total lock. But given their situation, I can't help but wonder, and this is what worries me if I'm a Rams fan, are these guys just saying, you know what, if Goff hits, we keep our job, and if he doesn't, it's somebody else's mess to clean up. Somebody else will have to deal with the consequences of this. That's what worries me if I'm a Rams fan.
What worries me if I'm a Rams fan is the fact that you just traded, everybody for Jared Goff, who, let's be honest here, there's no Andrew Luck in his draft. You're talking about, I almost want to go to not Mark Sanchez level, but it's Matt Leinart level, guys that you thought were going to come out and do really well out of the draft, but there's still enough there that there's still a ton of red flags on both of these guys to go, speaking about that, I want to know about this. Look at the Eagles. I mean, you got to mess with Bradford. You got Daniels signed to a huge deal. And then on top of it, you just traded the Fort for another quarterback. And this is on top of last year where they brought in, DeMarco Murray. They brought in Ryan Matthews. I mean, they had a mess in the backfield because you had too many guys. And then this year they do the same thing with quarterback. I don't get that one. That one to me is more egregious than the Rams. The Rams are their own mess, but the Eagles to me are the bigger mess. Help me out here. Please tell me I'm right.
No, you are right. Here's my issue. I have a couple of issues with the Eagles. Look, I'm not going to defend the job Chip Kelly did. Chip Kelly did a miserable personnel job. Here's my question: is somebody hired him a year ago to run personnel? Did they not check to find out what Chip Kelly's plan was? Because don't you think that would be a logical step when you hire somebody? You find out what they're going to do. So if they did, then that means you signed off on it. So how can you say that this wasn't agreed? Why should I trust you if you thought Chip Kelly's plan was so great? If you didn't sign up on Chip Kelly's plan, you just hired a guy to run your personnel department without finding out what he's going to do. It just seems like they're a very aimless organization. They're constantly changing plans. And then they replaced Howie Roseman, who had been the GM. They put Kelly in charge. Then they removed Kelly and reinstalled Roseman, who was the guy they demoted a year earlier. It's like, well, what's going on there? It's one thing. Obviously the Idzik thing didn't work out with the Jets. Woody Johnson changed direction quickly, but he brought in two guys who could help him out. He pretty much admitted, I messed up. I need people who can direct me here. What the Eagles did is they just went back to the guy that they demoted the year before, and now look at their quarterback situation. They give Sam Bradford this huge contract. You give Sam Bradford a contract like that, you're not necessarily committing to him for the long term, but you are saying that's the type of money where you're saying, I think this guy could conceivably be my long-term guy. I want to see how he plays. I'm going to give him a legitimate shot. And then you go up and sell the ranch to get Carson Wentz so that you can't, you're pretty much saying Bradford has no shot of being my guy. Well, that means you viewed him as a stopgap. If you viewed him as a stopgap, why are you giving him all that money? Why didn't you just go get somebody cheaper and hold the fort guy. Why didn't you just sign Chase Daniel and leave Bradford alone? It boggles my mind. I can understand it if you're sitting there at 8 and Wentz falls to you and you think this guy's too good to be true. I mean, you may say at that point you just say we signed Bradford. We didn't think Wentz was going to fall to us when it happened. He just happened to be there. It was we couldn't pass him up. No, you actively traded up. You didn't just actively trade up. You mortgaged your future to go up and get this guy. Why just sign Sam Bradford in the first place then?
Well, they didn't know necessarily that they'd be able to consummate that trade. They didn't know that someone else wouldn't give a better offer for Wentz. So I'm not sure that you can say, well, we shouldn't have signed Sam Bradford because we were going to go after Wentz. Going after Wentz doesn't mean you get Wentz. So I'm not as critical of what they did at the quarterback position as a lot of other people are. I don't like their quarterbacks, but if they like Bradford and they thought it might be a long-term solution, but they love Wentz, they may just thought, well, we don't think it's a realistic possibility to get Wentz, and then it turned out it was.
But I guess my point, though, is that you give Bradford all this money, yet you think so little of him that you feel the need that you have to make this huge offer to go get Wentz. Like, if you think so little of Bradford that you feel like I have to make this deal, like maybe you didn't know you were going to get him, but there just seems to be a disconnect with me that you're giving Bradford the type of money where you're signaling I think this could be my guy, and then at the same moment saying this isn't my guy. We have to get someone else.
It's almost like if the Jets gave the contract to Mark Sanchez and then went up and drafted another quarterback. It just doesn't make sense. If you're going to give that guy that money and tell him, hey, you're the starter, and you're even remotely thinking about another quarterback, what are you doing?
But Bradford's only really tied up for 2 years, right? I mean, they're not committed to it for 5 years or something, right? They committed to it as a 2 year That is more or less a stopgap. Yes, it's a lot of money they paid him, but they didn't structure it in such a way that they couldn't cut him for 3 or 4 years.
But the point is, you just got your quarterback of the future, right? This is a guy. What happens the second Bradford starts to mess up a little bit? Suddenly, you're going to have a $15 million backup riding the bench? And not to mention, you're not. And imagine this: Bradford and Wentz all of a sudden realize they don't have talent around them because you mortgaged everything, and you can't replenish it unless you go into free agency. But you can't spend money because guess what? Your cap is tied to 3 quarterbacks, only which one's going to see the field.
And my point is, if you think Bradford is a stopgap, well, why didn't you go get a cheaper stopgap? I mean, this is the reason the Jets haven't given in to Fitzpatrick's demands. Is they don't think Fitzpatrick's more than a stopgap. At some point, if he keeps demanding $16 million, they're just going to say, okay, well, we'll go pay Brian Hoyer half what we're offering Fitzpatrick. Because at the end of the day, even though we think Fitzpatrick's better, we don't think he's $12 million better than Hoyer. We may think he's $4 million better than Hoyer. So if you don't think, I guess my point is you're kind of sending mixed signals what you think about Bradford. I mean, why is Bradford so much better than these other stopgaps if you think he's a stopgap?
Right, they've overpaid for Bradford. I definitely agree with that. But they didn't commit to keeping him for a long time. So I'm not entirely sure that it was a terrible decision. It was an overpayment.
I'm sorry. This is the point I'm going to totally disagree with you on that. It was a god-awful decision to hand a guy starting money and then draft a guy and sell the bank to draft a guy who's going to replace the guy. I know what you're saying. It's only a 2-year. The problem is, in those 2 years, you're going to have either a problem where Wentz is going to be a wasted draft pick, or at best, Wentz takes over for Bradford. And what'd you get out of Bradford? 2 years of mediocre quarterback?
If Bradford starts for a full year and Wentz takes over, say, in game 3 or 4 in year 2, Bradford is not a waste and Wentz is not a waste either. I don't think that's necessarily true. If they really want to develop, it's true that the NFL doesn't develop quarterbacks this way anymore. But if that's their plan, if their plan is let Wentz sit for a year, he's not ready right now. Let him come in, sit for a year. Bradford plays for a year as your starting quarterback. You're not overpaying for a decent starting quarterback at that price. I don't think Bradford's worth that money, but as a starting quarterback, it's not overpaying. And then in year 2, Wentz comes in and starts after game 3 or 4 or whatever. You've gotten your money's worth from Bradford, and Wentz is not a waste of a draft pick. So I'm not sure that's necessarily true.
My biggest thing is, okay, no matter what, you're going to tie yourself to the 2 quarterbacks there, and you created a disaster. Because I understand the logic of, hey, you're absolutely right in one sense that, the problem with Sanchez was we never had that backup. You had Kellen Clemens and old man Mark Brunell. I mean, you had, Just for Men spokesman as your backup quarterback. Now you look at it, yeah, you have a backup. The problem is that backup already is going, you paid me starting money. I want to start. The hell with this. I don't need this. I'm going to go somewhere else. And now you're in a situation where you really don't have any value for Bradford, number one. Number two, you spent a mortgage, your future, for Wentz. To me, it just seems like they didn't have a plan going in. And when Wentz became available, they just went for him without thinking it through, like, hey, what's the other options here? Do we give Bradford everything?
If you've already signed Bradford and Wentz comes up as you decide he's your guy, what is your option? Your option is to get your guy. I think the only thing they did wrong here was overpay Bradford. I agree that he's overpaid, but I'm not so sure that anything else they did was all that egregious.
Well, and then they also paid Chase Daniel. I mean, they gave Chase
Daniel. That
Daniel
was egregious. So. I don't understand that move. That was to me. That's a much worse move than paying Bradford to me.
That to me is what I was saying, was all 3 of those moves made 0.0% chance. At least Hackenberg, I could put a 5%. Okay, maybe he figures it out. Those moves, as a nutshell, all 3 together, 0 sense.
And, I've been talking about, you want to give yourself as many chances as possible at quarterback. I mentioned Seattle. Like, here's the thing is, when Seattle signed Matt Flynn, he only had a handful of starts under his belt. A lot of it was based on projection. Sam Bradford's been the starting quarterback in this league since 2010. You know what you have in him. You know you either have a guy you want to go forward with or a guy who isn't. So, I mean,
the difference in that was Seattle drafted him in the 3rd round and didn't trade up and didn't mortgage the future for him.
Right.
I mean, there's your big difference between the 2.
See, we could actually fight. We could disagree about things. We're not all just patting ourselves on the back tonight.
Yeah, right. Hey, guys, I don't mean to be that guy, but I do have to run to work. It's 9:30 here on the West Coast, and I have a 10 o'clock show. So thank you for inviting me, John B. Mac, as always. It's a great pleasure. You may be a friend, but I do argue with you from time to time.
All right, well, Smack, do you have any final thoughts tonight?
I'm sorry, was that for me?
Yeah.
Final thoughts. Who do we like tomorrow? I think this guy. I may get his name wrong. Westerman, is that his right? Is that the right name? The guard. I think he might be an interesting selection if he's still available. I'm not sure how the rest of the 3rd round played out. He may have been taken, but and I want David Morgan in the 7th round if he's available. So there's my 2 thoughts for tomorrow.
All right, well, that's the final word. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight, listening to our coverage, and reading our site. We'll continue to update throughout the day tomorrow as the draft concludes and throughout the off season. I am John B. signing off. I hope you guys all have a great night.